Lecture 8. Are you an introvert, ambivert or extrovert? We're going to do a bit of a deep dive now on one of the big 5 personality traits, namely extroversion. Because out of the big 5 personality traits, this is the one that I feel is the most important to understand about yourself. And the Oxford Dictionary definitions of introvert, ambivert and extrovert are as follows. It describes an introvert as a shy, reticent person. An extrovert as an outgoing, socially confident person. And an ambivert as a person who has a balance of extrovert and introvert features in their personality. Do I agree with those definitions? Do you agree with those definitions? Well, for me personally, by and large, yes, with one quite significant exception, which is describing introverts as shy. Because while many introverts are indeed also shy, there are also many introverts that are just not shy. In other words, introversion and shyness are different things. Which begs the question then, why has the Oxford Dictionary defined an introvert as a shy person? Well, to be fair, you can't really blame them because it's only relatively recently that it's been discovered that introversion and shyness are different things. Certainly the view in popular media and in society is that shyness is the same as introversion. But it has now been proven that they are different things. It's now known in the scientific community that conceptually speaking, shyness and introversion are unrelated. And verywellmind.com says, an introvert enjoys time alone and gets emotionally drained after spending a lot of time with others. Whereas a shy person doesn't necessarily want to be alone, but is afraid to interact with others. And that's a good explanation of the difference. And a good example to further explain is to consider 2 children in the same classroom. One of them is introverted and one of them is shy. Now let's say that the teacher is organising an activity for all the children in the room. The introverted child would want to remain at her desk and read a book because she finds being with all the other children stressful. Whereas the shy child would want to join the other children, but would remain at her desk because she's afraid to join them. And so taking into account all the wonderful research that's gone into introversion and extroversion, much better definitions are as follows. Introverts tend to recharge their brains by spending time alone. Being around people for long periods of time, especially crowds, tends to drain introverts. Whereas extroverts gain energy from being around other people. Their brains are recharged by spending time with other people. Extroverts may even find their energy is drained when they spend too much time alone, and so they recharge by being sociable. And obviously an ambivert is somewhere in between. So to give you another example to help reinforce those definitions, let's say you have an introvert and an extrovert and they both get through to the end of their working week and they are both exhausted on Friday night. The introvert would want to recharge their batteries and make themselves feel better by just spending the evening alone. They might be reading a book or having a bath or watching TV, but whatever they're doing, the point is they would want to be alone, to recharge their batteries. The extrovert, on the other hand, when they get to the end of their working week feeling exhausted, they would actually want to go out to a party or socialise with somebody or a group of people in order for them to re-energise, in order for them to feel better and gain energy. For the extrovert, staying on their own on Friday night when they're already exhausted would probably be even more draining. The next question then is, why does this matter? Why are we delving so deep into this particular element of personality? Well, as I alluded to at the beginning of this lecture, I actually think that understanding and being aware of this particular personality trait has a much bigger impact on happiness than would understanding and being aware of any of the other 4 personality traits that we've covered. Because introversion and extroversion are at the heart of human nature. And one scientist even referred to them as the north and south of temperament. And the fact is, when you live your life in a way that complements your temperament, your productivity and more importantly, your happiness soars. It's important to understand if you're an introvert so you can manage your life accordingly. Likewise, it's important to know if you're an extrovert so you can manage your life accordingly. On the other hand, living your life in a way that goes against your natural introvert or ambivert or extrovert personality can make you less productive, less happy, and generally just drain your energy and your zest for life. Of course, we all sometimes have to do things that go against our natural tendencies and personality, but it shouldn't be all the time, or even most of the time. This is particularly important for introverts who have often spent so much of their lives conforming to extroverted norms in society that by the time they choose a career or a calling, it feels perfectly normal to ignore their own preferences. And obviously that's going to be damaging to their happiness. Because be under no illusion, introverts are not weird. I am an introvert. And that doesn't mean I hate people. It doesn't mean I'm shy. It just means that I need to spend lots of time on my own to recharge and re-energize my batteries. And so often when I meet people, they're always really surprised when I tell them that I'm introverted, because they say, oh, you don't come across introverted, you don't come across shy. And again, it just shows how ingrained in society this idea that shyness and introversion are the same thing is. Now, when I was a child, I would say I was introverted and shy, but as an adult, I'm definitely not shy anymore, far from it. But I am still introverted because that's a personality trait that doesn't really change. It might change slightly, but generally, the big 5 personality traits, including extroversion, doesn't really change. And being an introvert is who I am. But one thing I have been able to change and get rid of is my shyness. I'm actually now a very confident individual with high self-esteem, but I am still an introvert. And I believe that of the big 5 personality traits, extroversion is the one that is the most important to understand in detail because it has the biggest effect on your overall temperament, personality, and life. But before we move on to an exercise that I want you to do though, I would like to just finish off this little bit by saying that there's no such thing as 100% introvert and 100% extrovert. And a guy called Carl G. Jung once said, there is no such thing as a pure introvert or extrovert. Such a person would be in the lunatic asylum. Now I assume he was half joking there at least, but the point is, very few people are 100% introverted or 100% extroverted. The vast majority of people exist somewhere along the spectrum, because introversion or extroversion, however you want to describe it, is a spectrum. And you can be extremely introverted or extremely extroverted, but you can also be ambiverted, which is somewhere in the middle, and of course, you can be anywhere along the line in between. I, for example, would class myself as quite a strong introvert. I am very introverted, but I still have some extroverted tendencies. I still have some traits which will be more characteristic of extroverts. For example, I'm a risk taker and I'm very adventurous. And that kind of trait, being very adventurous and being a risk taker, is generally an extroverted personality trait. And yet here I am as a strong introvert with this extroverted tendency to take risk and be very adventurous. So it's about understanding that many of us have a mixture of introverted and extroverted tendencies, and it's just a question of understanding whether overall you are an introvert, an extrovert or an ambivert, and roughly where you are on the spectrum. We're going to do an exercise now which will involve taking this quiz that I'm going to show you to find out where you fall on the introvert-extrovert spectrum. And I suggest that you do this quiz now, but if you want to take it away with you and do it a bit later, I have produced a document so you can actually take it away. There's 20 questions and I want you to answer each question true or false, choosing the answer that applies to you most of the time. Because you may well read some of the questions and think, well, I'm like that some of the time, but not other times. And if that's the case, you've just got to have a really good think to yourself and think about which answer applies to you most of the time. So without further ado, let's crack on. What I'm going to do now is run through the 20 questions for you, but as I said, you can take this away with you in the form of the document that I've produced. But question 1, or should I say statement 1, because a lot of these aren't really questions as such, they're more like statements, and you just have to say, is it true or false for me, in terms of how I am most of the time, or what applies to me most of the time. So first up, I prefer one-on-one conversations to group activities. True or false? I often prefer to express myself in writing. I enjoy solitude. I seem to care about wealth, fame and status less than my peers. I dislike small talk, but I enjoy talking in depth about topics that matter to me. People tell me that I'm a good listener. I'm not a big risk taker. I enjoy work that allows me to dive in with few interruptions. I like to celebrate birthdays on a small scale with only 1 or 2 close friends or family members. People describe me as soft-spoken or mellow. I prefer not to show or discuss my work with others until it's finished. I dislike conflict. I do my best work on my own. I tend to think before I speak. I feel drained after being out and about, even if I've enjoyed myself. I often let calls go through to voicemail. If I had to choose, I'd prefer a weekend with absolutely nothing to do to one with too many things scheduled. I don't enjoy multitasking. I can concentrate easily. And finally, in classroom situations, I prefer lectures to seminars. Okay, let's move on and look at the results. What did you score? Well, there's no hard or fast rules in terms of how you interpret the results of this quiz, but in general terms, and this is just my opinion, if you scored 9 to 11 true or false, then this test would suggest you are an ambivert. If you score 12 to 16 true, then you lean towards being an introvert, and if you score 12 to 16 false, then you lean towards being an extrovert. And if you score 17 to 20 true, then the test suggests that you are very strongly introverted, and if you score 17 to 20 false, then it would suggest you are very strongly extroverted. But as I said, this is just a guide. The quiz you've just done is just something that's designed to give you an idea as to where you are on the spectrum. But of course, you still need to analyse yourself and think about yourself in terms of everything we've discussed and actually decide and realise and work out where you are on the spectrum. But the most important thing I'd say to understand is whether you are overall an introvert or overall an extrovert, or whether you are actually an ambivert. When I did this test, I can't remember my exact results, but I think it was either 17 or 18. It was definitely one of those two. But either way, that would suggest that I'm very strongly introverted. And to be honest, I'd agree with that. But whatever your results and level of self-awareness around this personality trait, it's critical to apply the knowledge you have to your life in a way that will play to your introverted or ambiverted or extroverted strengths. Because believe me, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert or an ambivert, you have unique strengths related to that you'll be able to apply to your life. And an example of how you might apply this self-awareness to your life in this case would be, let's say you are an introvert. Let's say you take this test and it comes out that you're an introvert. You'd want to think about what job you're doing and what job you want to get in the future. Because if you are an introvert, it might not be a good idea to get a job which involves being around other people all day, because that's going to really drain you. That said, you might decide that the career for you, based on other aspects of who you are, is a job which does involve being around other people, and that might be fine for you, but in that case it's therefore important to understand and be aware that because you're an introvert, if you've got a job where you're spending time with people all day, you're probably going to feel quite drained when you get back on an evening, and quite drained by the time you get to the end of the working week. And so it's going to be really important for you as an introvert to manage your personal time, to make sure that you give yourself plenty of time on your own to recharge and recuperate. If you're interested in diving even deeper into this personality trait and learning even more specifically about introversion, there's a book that I'd like to recommend to you. It's a really good book called Quiet by Susan Cain. And it's probably one of the best books out there on the subject of introversion. And it's a really good book for introverts, for them to understand themselves better and how to apply their strengths to their life. But it's also a good book, I think, even for extroverts, because remember, even as an extrovert, it's very useful to be able to understand introverts, because extroverts will have to deal with introverts in everyday life. Many extroverts will be married to introverts. Many extroverts at some point will have to manage and lead introverted people. Many extroverts might have an introverted leader. The point is, even if you're an extrovert, there's lots of advantages to being able to understand introverts and introversion. And so whether you are an introvert, ambivert or extrovert, I would definitely recommend this book if you're interested in learning more about this subject. And it's called Quiet by Susan Cain. Welcome back. You're making good progress through this course now, and you're now in section 3, the dark side, knowing yourself at the deepest, darkest level. And in this section, you'll learn what the dark side means in this context and why it matters. You'll also learn what your own dark side is. We'll discuss the power of the dark side, and you'll learn how to use your dark side in the right way. Lecture 9, the dark side, definition and importance. Now, the dark side can mean many different things in the world of personal development and psychology, and so the first thing I'd like to do is to define exactly what I mean by the dark side in this context. And Mark Twain once said, "Everyone is a moon and has a dark side which he never shows to anybody." And although that's a very old quote, it's actually a really good explanation as to what I actually mean by the dark side. It is literally that part of you that you never show to anybody. And so for our purposes, the dark side is the side of you that you keep hidden away from the world and that only you know about. Or at the most, only 1 or 2 people in your closest inner circle will know about. But generally it's that part of you that you keep hidden away from the vast majority of society and the vast majority of the world. And in many cases, if not most cases, it's that part of you that you keep hidden away from everyone. And this is why it's called the dark side. It's not dark because it's bad, it's just dark because it lives in the shadows of the person that you present to the world. It's hidden away in the dark so no one can see it, and that's why it's called the dark side. Not because it's bad or nasty or horrible or evil, it's just because it's hidden away. It lives in the dark of the person that you present to the world. And understanding your dark side is incredibly important to knowing yourself, simply because the dark side is a significant part of who you truly are at your core. I'd say it's a relatively small part of who you are, but it's very significant because it's almost like your natural untamed instincts. It's the purest, rawest version of who you really are. Unlike many aspects of ourselves, it's one of the few parts that hasn't been tainted by society or other people's opinions and judgments, or your parents or colleagues. It's not tainted by anything. It's very pure, very raw. And if you remember when I talked about why knowing yourself is so important near the beginning of this course, one of the things that I said is that what you don't know about yourself controls you. And this is another reason why I wanted to cover the dark side, because the dark side, if you aren't aware of it and you don't control it yourself, it can end up controlling you. So if you aren't aware of your dark side and you don't take control of it, it can at best lead you to a mediocre life of mediocre happiness, and at worst, if your dark side is completely controlling you instead of you controlling it, the dark side then can actually lead you to some pretty dark places. In other words, it can lead you to failure. It can lead you to grinding your life into the dirt, and that's going to create a lot of unhappiness in your life. I first heard of this concept of the dark side in this context from a guy called Tim Grover, and that's him. And Tim Grover is the CEO of Attack Athletics and author of a book called Relentless. And one of his quotes about the dark side in his book is this: "Deep inside all of us, there's an undeniable force driving our actions. The part of us that refuses to be ordinary. The piece that stays raw and untamed." And that's the point here. Your dark side is the purest and rawest version of who you really are at your core. As I said before, it's a relatively small part of who you are at your core, but it's the purest and rawest version, which is why figuring it out and understanding it is a huge part of self-awareness and getting to know yourself. So acknowledge and embrace it, because when you do, you can use it to become more productive, more motivated, more successful, and above all else, happier. You really can use it to maximize your happiness and maximize your life. And the dark side can be things like your secret desires. Maybe you've got secret desires for money, for power, for sex, or fame. It could be your ego, it can be your desire to be the best, it can be your love of alcohol or gambling, it can be your lust for excitement and adventure. It can be many different things. These are just a few examples. As I said before, the dark side is not bad or good, it just is. It just is a part of who you are. It can be almost like your instincts telling you what you want and driving you to get it. For example, if you've ever felt like you're destined for great things, that's your dark side talking. If you've ever felt that you should be doing more with your life than you currently are, that's your dark side talking. If you've ever felt an urge to win at something, or that nagging feeling that you're wasting your life in your current job that you hate, or you have a burning desire to hit a particular goal, that's your dark side talking. Your dark side can be as simple as the way you feel, or indeed who you become when you drive a supercar or win at tennis. It can be to do with who you become when you step into a work environment or onto the sports field, or who you become when you have a deadline to hit. The dark side is almost like your alter ego, but this time we're not talking about split personalities or being someone that you aren't. This is about understanding that your dark side is just a different part of the real you. Clark Kent's dark side is Superman. Bruce Wayne's dark side is Batman. Peter Parker's dark side is Spider-Man. Now, these may be fictitious superheroes, but I'm simply making the point that your dark side can very much be used for good. It can be used to become a better person, to become more productive, to become happier, to achieve meaning and purpose, and to find complete and utter fulfillment in your life. And by the way, everyone has a dark side. We may all have different kinds of dark sides involving many different things, but nevertheless, we all have a dark side. And it's now time for you to become self-aware of this very important part of who you are. Lecture 10, getting to know your dark side. We're going to do an exercise now so that you can get to know your own dark side. Still don't think you have one? Well, I'm going to be a little bit in your face here and say you're wrong. You've got to dig deep and be honest with yourself. It's self-reflection time. This is time to face yourself in the mirror. And you can start with this very basic question, which is probably the best question you can ask yourself when it comes to getting to know your dark side. What are the things that you don't want people, even if it's just your parents or siblings or best friend or society in general, to know about you? So what are the things that you don't want people to know about you? That could be your secrets. It could be specific things in your life that you don't want anyone to know about that you've done. It can be anything that you just don't want people to know about you. It can be a character trait, a personality trait, something you've done, something you want to do, cravings you have that you don't want anyone to know about. Just think about all the things that you don't want people to know about you. I've got a few other questions for you which are on a similar vein to that first one, but I'll go through them anyway because they might help. So you can also think about, when do you get angry or jealous? What situations and things cause you to get angry or jealous and almost become a bit of a different person? What do you crave that you know you shouldn't? Maybe there's things that people or your parents or your friends or society in general tell you that you shouldn't crave, that it's weird to crave or not morally right, but you crave it anyway. Think about that. What things do you crave that you know, for whatever reason, you shouldn't? Think about your desires, or your greed, or your ego, or your lust for forbidden things, or the moves that have helped you get to where you are. What gets you into the zone? Quite often the dark side is an essential link into the zone. People sometimes use their dark side to help them get focused on a task and to help them get motivated and into the zone. For example, one of my values, if you remember, is travel and adventure, and that's because I love travel so much in terms of visiting new places and exploring the countryside and beaches and coastal walks and mountain hikes and all that kind of thing, and even staying in nice hotels. I love all that so much that when I think about those kind of things, it really does motivate me and get me into the zone when it comes to doing the tasks and the activities that I believe are going to get me to be able to have that freedom where I can do that on a more consistent basis. What are your vices or addictions? Maybe you like to have a drink. Maybe you like the odd flutter on the horses. Maybe you like a bit of a gamble. Maybe you're almost addicted to exercise. Just think about all these things that you might be addicted to. They might be negative or positive addictions, because of course you can have positive addictions like exercise. What gives you the most pure pleasure in life? What do you love doing? What makes you feel alive? We've kind of already covered this question in a previous section, but think about it again from the point of view of your dark side, in terms of what might give you a clue as to what your dark side is. What gives you the most pure pleasure in life, even if it's not something that you might not share with anyone else? When you've figured out what you want in life, in other words, your vision and your goals, you can then use your dark side to get it. In other words, you can use the power of the dark side. You can harness the power of the dark side to help you get to where you want to be in life and enjoy the process of doing so, and therefore live a happy and fulfilled life. And when it comes to using your dark side to get what you want from life, this may come in the form of your why. In other words, a powerful reason or reasons for wanting to achieve a particular goal or vision. Because very often your dark side is linked to your reasons why you want to do things. Sometimes your reasons, your powerful reasons that get you fired up and motivated to achieve things, is very often linked to your dark side. Sometimes it is your dark side. And as the great philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And what he's saying there is that if you've got a powerful enough reason to achieve a goal or anything, you will always eventually find a way to achieve that goal. You'll be able to put up with incredible adversity. You'll be able to overcome unbelievable challenges. You'll go through anything and sacrifice anything in order to achieve that goal if you have a big enough why. Those with children will understand this, that children can be a very powerful why. If a child's life is in danger, a parent will do anything, and I mean anything, to save that child's life. And that's a good example of having a powerful why. But the point I'm making here is very often your reason or reasons for wanting to do things in life your meaning and purpose even, can be very much linked to your dark side. And so this is an example of using and channeling your dark side in a positive way by using it to create self-motivation to drive you to what you want to achieve in life, to overcome challenges, obstacles, adversity, and sacrifice things to get to where you want to be, but also to do so in a way that you're going to enjoy. So sometimes your why, or part of your why, might come in the form of an emotion that would power you to victory. And a couple of examples of how emotions can sometimes form part of your dark side and how you can use them and harness those emotions include things like, let's say somebody calls you fat. Now that might hurt your feelings, but if it's true, you can use that anger that you might feel to help you lose weight. So many people do this. So many people use this adversity and emotions that they might feel to power them to great things. So in this example, which yes is a bit of a random example, but in this example, if somebody does call you fat and if it does hurt your feelings and you feel angry, you can actually use that and control that anger and channel it into actually losing weight. You can channel it and use it as motivation to actually eat better and exercise more and lose weight. Because in your head, you might want to wipe the smile off that person's face. Now, obviously, uncontrolled anger like rage and hatred, that does more harm than good. So we're not talking about uncontrolled anger or uncontrolled emotions. We're talking about controlled anger, which is actually a calm but focused state of wanting to prove that person wrong. And of course, prove yourself right by achieving your goal. Another example of using an emotion to power you to victory would be, let's say in university, a friend laughs when you say you want to be an entrepreneur and simply says sarcastically, good luck with that. Again, you can use that as motivation. I know people who've done this. They've been in university and everyone's been saying what they want to do for a living, and some of their friends might be talking about how they're going to get this high-powered job and go onto this graduate scheme and get a company car. And then you might say, well, I want to be an entrepreneur. And they might just laugh at you. And then somebody says, oh, good luck with that. People use that kind of thing for motivation. Because as we know, being an entrepreneur is hard. And so when that person might fail in their third business, that motivation, that thought of the friend laughing at them and of saying to them, good luck with that, in that sarcastic voice, they can use that as motivation to carry on, to persist, and to continue until they succeed. They might not know that friend anymore. That friend might be a distant memory, but in their mind, they want to wipe the smile off their friend's face. They want to drive up in their Lamborghini when they've made millions as an entrepreneur and prove them wrong, even if it's just in their own mind. But the real point is you can use emotions not in negative ways, but in positive ways to power you to greatness. As I've hopefully drilled home to in this section, when you acknowledge and control your dark side, you're going to be happier in life because you're tapping into the rawest and purest version of who and what you are. And when I talk about this thing, I often think of a lion in a zoo versus a lion in the wild. Because when we picture a lion in the zoo, we all know it's different to a lion running around in the wild. A lion in the wild runs around, it'll kill things, it'll kill to eat, and it's not being bad, it's just being a lion. It's just being itself. But when a lion's in a zoo, it's in this enclosure or it's locked up in this cage. And what does it do? It just walks around slowly and lethargically. It doesn't go around killing anything, and it's lost its natural instincts. It doesn't run around as much. It just becomes tame and subdued. And it's a good analogy for how we live our lives in society. We bury our dark side. We lose sight of who we really are. And instead of being locked in an enclosure or a cage, we build our own metaphorical enclosures and cages in the form of other people's opinions. So instead of being locked in by a cage or an enclosure, we get locked in by societal norms, by the expectations of other people, by the expectations, judgments and opinions of friends, parents, colleagues, and we end up living other people's lives instead of being true to who we are. We live a life where we're subdued. We live a normal life of mediocre happiness. We settle. We abide by societal norms. We fit in instead of being who we are. Instead of being the lion running around in the wild, we live our lives like the lion locked in a cage in the zoo. And we get locked in by all these societal norms. And I'm not talking about laws here, by the way. We all have to obey laws of the land. That's completely different. I'm talking about the unwritten rules, which almost acts like a script, where we feel like we have to live our life in a certain way, according to other people's expectations, according to societal expectations and societal norms. And so we do things that we don't want to do, and we also don't do things that we do want to do because of all these judgments and opinions and expectations from other people and society in general. And of course, even our own insecurities can sometimes act as a cage that we lock ourselves in. And so when we use and acknowledge and embrace and control our dark side, we live our lives more like the lion in the wild. In other words, we're true to ourselves. And we don't just fit in for the sake of fitting in. We live our lives how we want to live them. Yes, within the realms of the laws, but other than obeying laws, we do what we want. We live our lives in a way that's going to make us happy and fulfilled. We're not constrained by other people's opinions, by society's expectations, by your parents' expectations, or by societal norms. We come alive and live the lives that we want to live. And so when you use and control your dark side, you will feel most alive. And that breeds happiness. You will feel in the zone or flow of life more often. And we all know how good that feels when time flies. And some other simple but very powerful suggestions in terms of how to harness and use the dark side in the right way include: do activities that feed part of your dark side, but control them before such pleasurable activities become dangerous. For example, if your dark side involves you being competitive and you have this unbelievable competitive streak, you can feed that part of your dark side by, for example, playing tennis or running marathons like I used to do. But if you don't control that part of your dark side, if you don't control that competitiveness, it could lead you to, for example, gambling to try and get rich quick. Or instead of enjoying a glass of red wine every now and then as part of a pleasurable activity with your spouse, you become an alcoholic because you don't control it. So do activities that feed part of your dark side, whatever it may be, but control them before such pleasurable activities become dangerous. Also bear in mind that there are positive and negative ways to feed your dark side, and so intentionally choose the positive ways. So to give you an example of this, let's say your dark side involves you being aggressive. Well, a positive way to feed your dark side in that respect would be to take up martial arts or boxing, channel it in that positive way, instead of going to the pub and getting involved in a brawl or a punch-up. That would obviously be a negative way of channeling your aggression. And boxers are actually a good example of those people who have dark sides and control them in order to have a happy and successful life, when very often they would otherwise be delinquents or in jail. Many boxers even openly talk about the fact that if it wasn't for boxing, they probably would be in jail. And yes, some boxers might still struggle with parts of their life and might still struggle to control their dark side, but the fact is, without boxing, they would be far worse than they are. They would be in a far worse position in life than they actually are. But the vast majority of boxers live happy and successful lives, are certainly much more happy and much more successful than they would otherwise be, because they've channeled their dark side in a positive way rather than just getting into trouble. Another way to harness and control the dark side in a positive way is to create positive addictions and positive habits in your life. Because we all have addictions, so why not intentionally choose to create positive addictions and positive habits in your life? So instead of becoming addicted to gambling or alcohol or drugs, become addicted to exercise, become addicted to helping others, become addicted to building good habits in your life. And finally, as we've discussed, you can use your dark side to tap into your whys for achieving things. In other words, use your dark side to tap into the reasons for wanting to achieve things. We're going to finish off this lecture and indeed this section with a case study, mainly to reinforce a lot of the points I've already made to make sure that you properly understand them. And one aspect of my dark side that I don't mind sharing with you is my competitiveness. And this is part of my dark side because few people know just how competitive I am. In other words, I'm almost secretly competitive because very few people who know me know just how competitive I really am. And just a few weeks ago, I was talking to my boss and I did admit to him that I was quite competitive. And he was really surprised. He just didn't see it in me. He didn't see it coming. Why? It's because I keep it, or at least have kept it until now, in the dark. And my competitiveness was a part of my dark side that drove me to the pinnacles of my life, those incredible achievements and successes. And it's also driven me to where I am now, in terms of the happiness and fulfillment and success that I have in my life right now. But it was the same part of my dark side that drove me to my lowest point of my life when I was sleeping in my car and £70,000 in debt. And the only difference is that during my lowest point of my life, my dark side was controlling me, whereas now I'm controlling my dark side. And another thing that can happen when I don't control my competitiveness is too much focus on my competition. And to give you an example of that, from a few years ago in my work, I had a colleague that used to do really well, and I was always a little bit jealous. And I was constantly focusing on him, and I was trying to copy him, and I was comparing myself to him. And of course, we all know that comparing yourself to others is a fast track to misery. One of my favourite quotes about that is the fact that comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is the thief of joy. When you're always comparing yourself to other people, you're never going to be happy. You should always try and focus on yourself. Yes, you can learn from people and you should look at what your competitors are doing. There's nothing wrong with that. But you shouldn't be obsessively comparing yourself to your competition or indeed other people in general. And by focusing too much on this particular person, it led to me being reactive rather than being proactive. I was reacting to everything that he was doing rather than being proactive and focusing on myself and focusing on trying to make myself and my team better. I was constantly looking at him. And focusing on and obsessively studying the competition can lead to a stifling lack of creativity because you end up just copying what they're doing. And that's what I ended up doing. Instead of becoming creative and focusing on myself and my own team and therefore coming up with my own ideas in terms of how to get better as a manager, as a leader, and how I could help make my team become better, I was constantly focusing on what he was doing and just copying him, basically. And so I was always playing catch up, hanging on to his coattails. And the reality is, he constantly kept getting better results because I was just playing catch up. And when I actually turned it on its head and started being more proactive and focusing on myself and making myself better as a manager and leader and thinking for myself in terms of what I can do to help my team get better, I actually started to get better results then and actually started to compete with him and his team then. Another thing that can happen with my competitiveness when it's not controlled is a severe lack of patience through the uncontrolled urge to try and beat everyone now instead of playing the long game. And this was never more obvious in my own life than through my trading and investing activities that led to me gambling everything away. Because if you remember, I started off trading and investing in a very controlled, disciplined way, but then my competitiveness took over and it started to control me. And that manifested itself in terms of me, in my own head, wanting to beat everyone now instead of playing the long game. And because I wanted to beat everyone now, in my mind, the only way I could do that was to make loads of money really quickly. And so I was very impatient. And so I started to take on more and more risk because I was wanting to make money even quicker. And that culminated, as you know, in me gambling, literally gambling on the markets because I was just trying to get rich quick. And that actually eventually destroyed my life. And that's because ultimately my competitiveness was not controlled. And so my uncontrolled competitiveness led to impatience, which led to stupid short-term decisions, which led to horrific longer-term results. So nowadays, I instead harness my competitiveness. In other words, I control it by focusing on being the best I can be. In other words, my biggest competitor now is myself. It's the person I was yesterday. So make your greatest competitor you, and you are simply increasing your chances of happiness and are less likely to compare yourself to others. Don't get me wrong, I do harness the thoughts and emotions of beating other people in order to create that burning desire and intense motivation to win, but I then channel that energy into focusing on what I can control, which is myself and what I can do and how I can get better, instead of focusing on other people all the time. And it's much better to do this rather than expending all your energy on just focusing on the competition and therefore playing catch up with them all the time or making stupid short-term decisions to try and beat them in the moment, to try and beat them now. And as a quick side note, this also allowed me to tap into one of my own values as well, which of course is self-improvement, and that for me helped build further happiness. I'd like to finish off this lecture and indeed this section with a quote and then a recommended read for you. So first of all, the quote: "If you continuously compete with others, you become bitter. But if you continuously compete with yourself, you become better." In terms of a recommended read, welcome to section 4, the final section, and probably quite a short one as well because this is just my final thoughts and goodbye. And in this section, you'll learn the importance of testing and learning in your life, some quotes and final thoughts on happiness and knowing yourself, and how to contact me and/or stay in touch. Lecture 12, Test and learn through trial and error. Trial and error is one of the best ways I know to figure yourself out, but of course it's also time consuming. But don't let this put you off. Now, everything you've learned in this course is definitely going to help fast track your self-awareness as a gateway to happiness. But it's really important alongside that you continue throughout your whole life to just do things, try things, because that's how you learn. So try new things, test them, and if they don't work or they don't make you happy, you'll have learned something. And that's invaluable. And it means that whatever you've done was not a waste of time. If you try something and it's a complete failure, in my opinion, it's only a failure if you don't learn from it. And it's only a waste of time if you don't learn from it. And I've got some quotes here that I'd just like to share to help explain some of these concepts. And this one is apparently from Albert Einstein. You might have heard it before. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's just saying how it really is stupid to do something, fail at it, and not learn from it. So try things, do things, and if you fail, which you will a lot, learn from it and you'll get better. Because failure is the best teacher. And contrary to what some people might have you believe, failure is not the opposite of success. It might be in the dictionary, but in real life, failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of success. There is nobody on the planet who has become successful at anything without failing loads of times. You cannot succeed without failure. And the most important thing is to learn from it. Because when you learn from it, you become better. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, success is going from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm. Now, the exercises and knowledge that we've covered so far in this course will definitely fast track your self-awareness, but there's no teacher as good as experience. And as I've already alluded to, even getting experience can be fast-tracked by simply doing. Quit pondering and dwelling on the past, because the past has passed. It's a very easy thing that a lot of us do, which is thinking about the past, going over it over and over again. And there's a happy medium here. There's nothing wrong with going over the past if you're reflecting on the past and figuring how you can learn from any mistakes you've made and how you can get better. But don't ponder, don't dwell on the past, because it's gone. There's nothing you can do about the past in terms of changing it. The past is a place to learn from, not to live in. So many people live in the past, but you can't move on in your life if you spend it in the past. And as this other quote here says, you can't start the next chapter of your life if you keep rereading your last one. So focus on moving forward with your life, with the knowledge and lessons that you've learned from your past, and try things, test and learn. Trying and failing, as I said, is not a waste of time. The only wastes of time are dwelling on your past and focusing on things that you have literally no control over. The other waste of time, which I've not put there, is failing at something and not learning from it. A useful principle to remember when playing the game of life and putting into practice this testing and learning philosophy is to use joy as your GPS. It's a very simple concept, but it can work quite well. Use joy as your GPS. In other words, go towards the activities and the hobbies and the experiences and the people that make you feel happy, fulfilled, motivated, inspired, alive. And go away from the activities, the hobbies, the experiences and the people that drain your happiness. So if you do something and you hate it, don't do it again. But of course, sometimes in business, there might be something that you have to do to move your business along that you hate doing. And if that's the case, in the short term, you might have to do it if it's for the greater good. But in the longer term, certainly when you've got enough money to do so, you should then delegate those things. If there's things that you don't like doing, but they still do have to be done for whatever reason, delegate them if you can, and focus on what you're good at and what you enjoy doing. If you try a hobby and you don't like it, don't do it. If you spend time with somebody who makes you feel good, who gives you happiness, who inspires you or motivates you, or that you just love being with and talking to, spend more time with that person and people like them. If you come across somebody or meet somebody or you have someone in your life already that drains your happiness or crushes your dreams or makes you feel bad about yourself or insecure, spend less time with them. If you can, cut them out completely. But I appreciate that can be difficult if it's things like your parents or family. But at the very least, spend less time with them, or at least spend less time listening to them, even if it involves putting some headphones in and listening to positivity